So I'm here with Vivien from H2Growth Strategies. Welcome, Vivien.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak.
Yeah. How are you enjoying the conference so far?
You know, it's really interesting. A lot of these people I've never heard speak before.
Yeah.
And it's actually my first time at the conference.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm meeting some really interesting people.
Yeah, absolutely. A great platform for partnership.
Yes. And I love the sort of the premise of the conference, which is that you can teach people about CSR and inspire them to start their own CSR programs, and you can facilitate partnerships between NGOs and corporations, and it seems like a great service to me, to the community.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do with your organization?
Sure. So we're advisors to nonprofits and foundations on their strategies, their fundraising, and their board building.
Okay.
So, for example, we recently finished an engagement with a major cultural institution in Brooklyn that had just finished a capital campaign. So they'd raised $120 million to basically redo most of their facilities.
Wow.
And they recognized that they were not going to be able to run the next campaign with the same donors.
Sure.
So they engaged us to take a look at their major gift program, right? So the individuals who are giving a lot of money, to let them know what we thought they could do differently to raise more money.
Sure.
And then we also helped them to identify new prospects in Brooklyn, because Brooklyn is a happening place these days, right?
Engage the community.
A lot of money in Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And a lot of younger money, and people who live in Brooklyn really want to give their money in Brooklyn.
And invest, yeah.
And it went really, really well. They're very happy with the results. And so that's sort of an example of the kind of work that we do.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you shared with me you just published a book as well, right?
Yes, our first and maybe our last book. It's called Big Impact, Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. And it's really about social change and leadership as told through the stories of these nearly 50 nonprofit leaders from organizations like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Ford Foundation and Goodwill Industries International. We mostly talk to the CEOs.
Okay.
And it was incredibly inspiring.
I imagine.
To talk to them.
Yeah.
They're so wise. And through this research, we developed 7 principles for making positive social change, and those principles are valid not just for world leaders, but for anyone who wants to make change in their own communities. So we think people can really learn from the experiences of these leaders.
Take the organizational knowledge and apply it on an individual level.
Yes, and say if you want to make a change in your local school system or your local police department, or you want to change the zoning, or whatever it is you want to do in your community to make it a better place to live, you can learn from these principles, which are things like you have to campaign on many fronts, right? So you can't just look at one aspect of the solving the challenge. You might have to use litigation. You might have to use advocacy. So it's but anyway, we just learned a lot from talking to these folks. One of my favorites, of course I don't have any favorites, but one of the more interesting interviews that we did was with Evan Wolfson, the founder of Freedom to Marry.
Okay.
So he's the guy he's considered one of the leaders in the gay marriage movement, and he worked on gay marriage for 32 years from the time that he wrote his law school thesis about gay marriage.
Wow.
And so one of the things that he talks about is how making social change is often a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Oh, no.
And you have to take care of yourself, because it could take a really long time. And he'd been working on it for 32 years, but of course people were dreaming about it even before that.
Oh, yeah.
And he's the one who talks about losing forward. So he understood that you can't win every engagement, every battle, but if you it's like in the South, for example, he recognized that probably the South wasn't going to lead the gay marriage movement, but they engaged in the South anyway, and they ran campaigns in the South. And they had a special campaign for Latinos and one for African Americans. And the strategy that went into really making this a reality it's just fascinating. I love strategy. So I'm kind of a strategy nerd.
It's interesting to see the behind the scenes.
Yeah. It was really fascinating.
Wow.
And another one one of the things that these leaders demonstrate is an incredibly high level of emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
And you see how they've taken often tragic circumstances in their own lives and challenges and turned those into the fuel for making positive change. So Leon Botstein, who is the president of Bard College in Annandale-on-Hudson, has been the president of Bard for over 40 years. He's like a legend at Bard. And he's taken Bard from this kind of it was dying when he took it over, and no one thought he was going to succeed. He was like 28 at the time.
Really?
Yes. And soon after he came to Bard, his 7 or 8-year-old daughter was killed as she was crossing the road on the way to get the school bus. And he says his first impulse was to throw himself out the window.
Sure.
But instead, what he's done is he's made Bard into this kind of innovative laboratory for things like prison education. Bard was one of the first colleges to go into prisons like Sing Sing and teach prisoners. Yes.
Wow.
And they also have helped to pioneer this concept of the early college, where, in fact, one of the speakers was talking about that before, where students can, in 4 years, they can earn a high school diploma and an associate's degree.
Really?
Yes. So this is a movement now in the United States, and Bard has these so-called early colleges all over the United States and also globally.
Sure.
So he's taken that tragedy and turned it partially. He says you can't. When you're knocked down, you just have to get up. It's like a prize fight.
Yeah.
You have to keep getting up, and you have to take those experiences and turn them into purpose for your life.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of stories that we heard when we interviewed folks. So you can imagine it was inspiring for us, and we think very inspiring for the reader.
Yeah. I wanna check it out.
Good.
You've got me hooked.
You can buy it on Amazon.
Okay.
And you can also buy it on our website, which is H2Growth.com. So H, the number 2, the word growth.com.